Welcome to committee, Mr. DiMauro. You have 5 minutes and may begin when you are ready.
Thank you very much, Chair Fowler. Thank you especially for accommodating my schedule today. I really appreciate that. Good afternoon. Good afternoon also Vice Chair Odioso, Ranking Member Robinson, and members of the House Education Committee. My name is Scott DiMauro. I'm in my 34th year in education, including 16 years as a classroom teacher in Worthington. Speaking on behalf of the nearly 120,000 members of the Ohio Education Association, all looking forward to working with you to make sure that all of our students in our public schools have the resources that they need to succeed in school and in life. I'm not going to go through all of the details of our written testimony. I encourage you to take a look at it, and we'll be happy to answer questions, but I do want to hit a few highlights, starting by talking about school funding. I want to begin by expressing our gratitude to the members of the 134th and 135th General Assemblies who supported, secured passage, and updated the components of the Fair School Funding Plan. This funding model, if implemented as intended, provides a transparent, student-centered formula that is based upon how much it costs to educate a child and how much a local community can afford to contribute to those costs. The budget proposal before you continues the phase-in years 5 and 6 of the funding plan. However, the proposal continues to use base cost components from fiscal year 22 data, while the local share of funding, property, and income values is based on more current data. This results in a disparity in support, with the local share of funding education increasing and state responsibility decreasing. Based on initial simulations from the Ohio Legislative Service Commission, this imbalance is illustrated by traditional district formula funding decreasing over the biennium by approximately $103 million when compared to FY25 funding. Approximately 343 school districts, or 56%, will experience a decrease in state formula funding from 25 to 26, and 360 districts, or 59%, will see a decrease in state formula funding from fiscal year 26 to 27. Of the districts that would see state aid decline over the biennium, 61 districts have seen enrollment growth since fiscal year 22. This is a direct result of updating the local capacity side of the equation, but not the base cost inputs. Further, analysis by the Ohio Education Policy Institute indicates that the statewide average state share percentage decreases from 43.3% in fiscal year 24 to only 32.2% in fiscal year 27. This is an 11.1% decrease in state responsibility to support education, the lowest in memory, and I will say completely unacceptable. The result is an increase in the burden borne by local communities and is in opposition to the DeRolf decision that the state should move away from an over-reliance on local property taxes to fund Ohio's schools. Let me cut to the chase. OEA believes it's time to fulfill Ohio's commitment to the students who attend public schools and our communities by updating and fully funding the Fair School Funding Plan. Failure to do so will result in consequences at the local level, such as larger class sizes, loss of academic programs and supports, and loss of educators. All of this has a harmful effect on Ohio's public school students. And let me add, school districts need to budget for current prices. For example, I know each of your grocery or utility bills are not the same as they were 3 years ago. Neither are the costs of our schools. Briefly, let's talk about private school vouchers. We know that this budget, while cutting public education funding, increases significantly funding for private school vouchers, the vast majority of those dollars going to students who have always been attending private schools. I want to point out that we need to hold those schools accountable. We recently did a survey, and over 80% of Ohioans said that they support new accountability measures that will require private schools to meet the same standards as public schools. There are several other policy items in the testimony that I just want to highlight. We have concerns about some student assessment changes in 3301.0715. We have very serious concerns about teacher assignment language. But there are a couple of policy changes that we are supportive of, including a new school employee vacancy survey and elimination of the video component of the resident educator program. That concludes my testimony. I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. DiMauro. Do we have questions for the guest? We do. Representative Brennan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, President DiMauro. Good to see you. So you kind of answered my first question, and that was, if we don't fully fund the Fair School Funding Plan, are we going to slide back into unconstitutional waters as defined by the plaintiffs in the DeRolf cases? And clearly your answer to that would be yes. So my question is, I don't think you spoke to the seniority changes in the governor's proposed budget. Could you speak to us about the problems that is going to cause our public schools?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Fowler Arthur, Representative Brennan. Appreciate the question. We believe that every single student deserves to have a highly qualified teacher, and we also believe in the power of collective bargaining to ensure that labor and management have an equal seat at the table when it comes to negotiating the terms of collective bargaining agreements. A lot of collective bargaining agreements address issues of how teachers are assigned. There's language in the budget bill that would disregard collective bargaining agreements, give superintendents sole discretion to determine where teachers are best served, and we frankly have two major concerns with that. One is that there is the potential that people would be placed in positions that they're really not qualified or experienced to perform, but also that it really does undermine that collective bargaining relationship. Oftentimes, those agreements in the contract came as a result of careful negotiations, trade-offs on both sides. To arbitrarily put the thumb on the scale by the legislature and undercut bargaining rights, we think could have some unintended consequences.
Madam Chair, quick follow-up.
Briefly.
What impact could that have on attracting folks to the career and retaining them?
Thank you again for the question, Chair Fowler Arthur, Representative Brennan. As I was talking with one of my colleagues about this issue the other day, you could find a situation in districts where if someone is put into a position where they really don't feel that they're a good fit, it could accelerate some of our challenges when it comes to teacher recruitment and retention, and it could make it harder for school districts to hold on to good people.
Thank you for that. I would just ask a brief follow-up to that, and isn't that already happening in some areas? Because I've got teachers who've been put in to teaching positions that is not their preference, and they have expressed concern that it's so that they would leave the field. Is that not happening already?
Chair Fowler Arthur, it varies district by district, and there are some places where the collective bargaining agreements give significant latitude to management for placement of people in those kinds of positions. The kinds of stories that you've heard are probably in places that don't have seniority provisions that limit those kinds of assignments. What I'm hearing from are places where they do have seniority protections in terms of placement and assignment decisions. There's a real concern that we could lose some good people that way.
Thank you. Representative Robinson.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. How are you doing, President DiMauro? It's good to see you again. Just two quick questions on my end. The numbers you mentioned were pretty stark. The ones that stood out the most were, I think you said 59% of school districts will see a decrease in state formula aid, and at least more than 60 schools are going to see enrollment increase despite that decrease in funding, which is going to create a conundrum. I guess the first question I have, looking at those two pieces of the funding, looking at the teacher assignment piece that Representative Brennan just mentioned, what could be the impact overall in the climate for recruiting and retaining teachers in the state of Ohio, and how does that impact students' ability to learn if we don't address these issues?
Thank you very much for the question, Chair Fowler Arthur, Representative Robinson. If we see these kinds of funding cuts that are envisioned in this version of the state budget, particularly when you compound that with what are now some uncertainties around what's going to happen with federal funding related to things like Title I and IDEA. You compound that in story after story after story at the local level where, because of challenges in getting school levies passed, every day I open up the newspaper, I see more disturbing stories about school boards that are having to initiate reductions in force and other kinds of cuts. It has a direct negative impact on students, first and foremost. It means that you have larger class sizes. It means that you have fewer academic interventions being provided to students. It means you have fewer resources for the kinds of essential non-academic supports that come in the form of school nurses and counselors and social workers. It means that a lot of good people end up losing their jobs. And in fact, Representative Jones, I think you were present in one of our locals recently where they were making cuts, and they cut a highly experienced person who's a good friend of mine, career tech teacher, which is really sad for that educator, but even more so, a loss of a well-rounded education for students. The Constitution of the state of Ohio is absolutely clear that the number one responsibility for funding our public schools lies with the state of Ohio. It's embedded in our Constitution, thorough and efficient system of common schools. If the state fulfills to live it up to its responsibility, it's going to be bad for kids, but it's also going to put more and more pressure on local taxpayers who are going to be confronted with, do they want to protect the integrity of their community, knowing that public schools are at the center of quality of life in local communities. And in order to do that, that means tax increases for property owners, or serious cuts for their children.
We reached the end of the 2-minute block there a few minutes back,
right.
or a few seconds, excuse me.
Thank you for your
minutes.
indulgence. My apologies.
Thank you. Representative Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Scott, Mr. DiMauro, for being here. You've already kind of hit on one of my questions. I have a couple, but for time's sake, we'll probably only get to one. I've had several conversations with a lot of our school boards, school districts, administrators, and whenever they start making cuts, it's to those career tech programs, it's to the gifted programs, it's to all those programs that a lot of our students who attend non-traditional public schools enjoy each and every day because of the lack of accountability. And I've had this brought to my attention more than once about why are we allowing school boards and why are we looking at this and saying we're going to cut all these programs that kids really, A, need, and B, enjoy. But from what you're seeing and what you're hearing on your end, we are, and this is a conversation we could go very deep in. We have CCP, we have a lot of choices for our students today. Our public schools are left with a lot of kids that don't have the opportunity for CCP. They don't have the opportunity to attend a STEM school. They don't have the opportunity to attend maybe a charter school or a private school or a Catholic or a Christian school because education may not be the focus of that family because they're worried about paying their bills. Would you agree with me in saying that we are expected in the public school to create the same product as all of our competitors in this world of education with fewer dollars, and we have a greater need for resources? Would you agree with that whole thing I just said?
Chair Fowler, Arthur, Representative Jones, wholeheartedly I would agree with you. And I would say that public schools do an incredible job of meeting those expectations, serving students from all backgrounds regardless of race, gender, natural ability, faith, interest level in various topics. We serve everybody. And when schools don't have the resources that they need, then that means that it becomes harder and harder to serve the range of students, provide a well-rounded curriculum to everybody, including career tech options and gifted programs and foreign language programs and AP courses. And it also really serves to narrow down the curriculum to those things that are focused on standardized tests. And that doesn't create an opportunity for learning that really nurtures kids' imagination, creativity, and desire to learn. So yes, I agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just two last questions here. You shared a lot of data on the first page of your testimony about the school districts expecting a decrease with the fiscal year funding that the governor is proposing. Have you run those same numbers using a full implementation and the end of the guarantees, and how many districts would be losing funding if that took place?
Chair Fowler, Arthur, I have not seen those numbers.
I was asking if you would be running that as a simulation, and if you could share those numbers with the committee, please.
Absolutely. As soon as we have those, we will be sure to share them.
That would be great. We're hoping to be able to send them out yet this week. The other question I have, obviously, tight budget times are not fun for anyone. Do you have any recommendations on areas that we could look for efficiencies or shared services that would not necessarily be impacting teachers directly?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I do think, some of the most obvious issues would be looking at the proposed increases in funding for vouchers and charter schools, making sure that if those kinds of programs are going to be expanded, it's not being done disproportionately at the expense of public schools. So that would be the first place that I would look. I would also, be looking at revenue choices that this legislature has to consider. But as far as cuts within the education budget, the beauty of the Fair School Funding Plan is that it identifies the components of a quality education for every single student. And what I don't think we want to get into doing is starting to decide, well, that component is more important or less important than this other component. Then you don't really have, kind of the basis for the Fair School Funding Plan in the first place.
I guess just drilling down on that briefly. So it would appear from a quick look at the Department of Education Red Book, and I'm assuming you got an opportunity to see that. All of us would have loved more time to delve into it, but it would appear like over the biennium, we're looking to put about $500 million more from the General Revenue Fund into traditional education than we have in the past for each fiscal year. So when you're talking about efficiencies in general, where would you target those efficiencies so that we can stay within the means that we have available while not cutting classroom instruction?
Madam Chair, I think it is important to make sure that the formula is fully funded. And I hear what you're saying in terms of there are components in terms of specialized programs beyond base funding that increases that number a little bit. But I'd also point out that there are certain aspects, including the cost studies related to English language learners, cost studies related to special needs students, and cost study, which has not been released yet, regarding economically disadvantaged students that aren't factored into the budget at all. And I do believe that it was important to consider all of those things in totality. So I don't know of places where you can cut. I think right now, overall, this is a underfunded budget.
Thank you for that, Representative Odioso.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your testimony. Does your association, does it have like a priority that you could share with us about what are those policies or tests that are the most onerous and for classroom instruction and for the lives of the teachers in their day-to-day interactions with their students? Do you understand what I'm getting at in terms of what can we cut that would make the public school teachers' lives better and more effective teachers? Because I'm of the opinion that we need to look at all of these things. And I would ask you, is there a set of tests that you would like to see cut?
Thank you, Chair Fowler, Arthur, Representative Odioso. We have supported legislation over several General Assemblies that would reduce Ohio's mandatory standardized testing down to federal minimums. And we'll be happy to share a list of assessments that the state is still providing that are required in state law but not required under federal standards, certainly as one point. Second point, in response to your question, some of this is driven by tests, but there are also, I was in a meeting yesterday with Director Dakin, and he raised that same question about, are there things that we put on the plates of teachers that we can take off those plates to allow them to really focus in on the needs of students? I don't know how many of those things have a price tag attached to them. In fact, taking some of those responsibilities or burdens off teachers might actually create costs. For example, if you have teachers monitor a study hall and you could have somebody who is a classified staff person do that instead, there's a cost associated to that. But that is something that we're looking into, and I told the director, and I'll tell you the same thing, that as we develop that list of kind of that wish list of ways to take things off the plates of teachers, we'll be sure to share that with you.
Thank you for that. And I would just, again, emphasize if we could have that very timely. I know that discussion has been going on for a couple of years, but the budget process is moving rapidly, and we would like to include your feedback, so we would need that yet this week if possible. Representative Robinson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one last question. So we heard from the director earlier today, and looking in the Red Book, that clearly traditional public schools are going to be underfunded by at least $100 million compared to charter schools and the expansion of vouchers in the state of Ohio. Over the last several years, school districts have had a chance to use ARPA dollars. They've had a chance to use COVID dollars that have helped them financially, in addition to this fair school funding, and it's still been tight for school districts. Can you talk about what the impact is going to be now that those ARPA dollars and others are away, and if we don't at all invest more in the fair school funding plan, what that will mean for districts?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative Robinson. I think, first off, it's important to note that school districts, by and large, did a good job using those federal resources the way they were intended, and that is to address one-time needs, to not get essentially entangled in long-term obligations, hiring a lot of staff, things like that. And generally what we're seeing across the country, or what we're not seeing, is a funding cliff, I think, that some people might have expected and we might have seen, coming out of the 2008 recession. That said, I do know that there were a number of districts that, as they were receiving supplemental federal funds, put off going to the voters, with new levies, and maybe districts that, because of the uncertainty of COVID, chose not to go to the ballot box. And we saw last year the lowest passage rate in quite some time. And so I think part of it is that just the normal cycle of levies is catching up, and there isn't that extra safety net that the federal relief dollars provided on that.